My name is Jessica. I'm the Director for Work Life at UW Human Resources, and I'm really excited today to host this session as part of our um, Building Strength from Within During Times of Change resource series. You can read more about that resource series on the article that was published a few weeks ago. I'm going to go ahead and drop the link to that in the chat so everyone has that available. And then the next session that I want to use this opportunity to pitch is that self-care session, which is tomorrow, February 4th at 11 a.m. to noon. That will also be with Carly. So I hope you'll register for and join us for that. The registration link is included on that page that I just shared in the chat. Today's speaker joins us from the Washington Employee Assistance Program. That's Washington EAP in the wonderful UW acronym land. The Washington EAP is UW's mental health, legal, financial, and work-life resource benefit, and it's available to PEB-eligible employees and their household members, so keep that in mind. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Carly Osborne, Education and Awareness Specialist for Washington EAP.
Thank you, Jessica. Hi, everyone. As Jessica said, I'm Carly with the Washington State EAP. And today we are talking about leading the human side of change. If you joined us earlier in the week for navigating change in challenging times, this topic goes right along in with that. We're going to go over some of those same specific topics we talked about in that first presentation, but then also go a little bit deeper. So this is a great continuation for anyone who joined us before. For anyone who's new to this, you're going to learn a lot today. So let's go ahead and get started. All right. So we know that change has a bad reputation. Anytime we hear about change, it kind of sets that survival mode off in us. Our fight, flight, freeze kicks in. We can, feel all over the place emotionally. Change usually has a bad rep. And even if it's a good change, it can still kind of knock us for a loop and make us feel like we just, we're not sure of anything. But what we do know is that when we are experiencing change, we're not alone in this. And when we are in a position where we're guiding other people through it, it just becomes helpful to know about how we react and why we might be reacting to this change in a way so that we can have a better opportunity to help those who are looking to us for some guidance. So we just want to remember that even if the change feels a lot, whether it's you're viewing it negative or positively, that we're all going through it and we're all going to find ways to work through it together. One of the things, actually a couple of the things that are really important to know is that change impacts us at work at an individual level. We see people, missing work. They might actually be physically at work, but they're not really there. You can kind of see they're not getting work done, or they're just not, they're not as productive as they used to be. So we see a decline in productivity and performance. We also see that enthusiasm for projects can really drop off, or that our initiatives don't land the way we want them to. Of course, stress and anxiety get a little higher. We also see that people's attitudes towards their work environment, their work teams, their organizations tend to change and become a bit more negative. They might be a little bitter. And so we look at that as at the individual level. So it impacts us as individuals, it kind of spreads the team. And then we start having impacts on the organization. So again, increased morale and satisfaction by employees. Work isn't a good place. We don't want to be there anymore. We see that people tend to leave rather than stick with us through the changes and challenges that we're experiencing. And then we also find that replacing those people tend to be a bit harder as well, because, people talk and they know why we leave places, why we leave our environment. Very rarely does no one say, oh, it was a wonderful job. I loved it so much. That's why I left. So we see that it gets harder to bring people in. And then we also see that as far as collaboration and innovation go, it impairs us. It makes it so that it's harder for us to implement changes that need to be done or collaborate to make sure that work processes are continuing the way that they are supposed to. So this is what we're thinking of when we're talking about leading the human side of change. And then, of course, the big thing is that the more resistant and the more disengaged and uninvolved our teams are, the less likely we are to be able to implement change at the pace that we would want to. So things kind of slow down, which just prolongs that stress and anxiety and tension for everyone. So because we're recording and we do have a more limited amount of time together today, I have a discussion question up here. If you'd like to answer in the chat or in the Q&A, you are more than welcome to. If not, it's something that you can look back on and reflect on later after the PDF is shared with you. But something to kind of consider is when you've experienced change in your workplace, especially change that might not have been managed as well as it could have been. How did that impact the team morale? How did it impact productivity? Something to really think on and reflect because it helps give us insight as to how not only our teams responding, but how we as individuals respond to and that impact that we feel. So moving on and talking about change, there's two things that are really, really important to know is that change and transition are often used interchangeably, which makes sense because we hear change and we know that change is that external thing, it comes from the outside, right? It's the situation that someone has given to us, or sometimes we feel like it's forced upon us. Sometimes it's even a decision we've made of ourselves, but it's this external thing. It's the announcement, the memo, the meeting, the calendar date, whatever that is. So it's an external force. And then we've got transition, which is the internal force of change. So we have the external change and we have the internal change, which is transition. So you can see why they're kind of used interchangeably. But for the purposes of our time together, we are looking at change, meaning transition. So it's a psychological process that we all go through. It's the emotions we have, the thoughts we have, the behaviors and physical reactions that we have to change. They are unique to everybody. We all have them to varying levels. So this is what we're really focusing on when we're talking about leading the human side of change. We're not going to worry about that external thing that many of us don't have control over. Instead, we're going to focus on us as individuals and as teams in our workplaces. So when I say change today, what we're talking about is this transition. And just a lovely side-by-side comparison chart because I think sometimes it's really helpful to have that to look at to kind of give us an idea of, you know, why they kind of are similar but not the same thing. Of course, the biggest thing we often look at change is we're gaining something. We're gaining a new workspace. We're gaining a new insert whatever that new thing might be here. Whereas for us as individuals, that internal change, we're also experiencing it as a loss. So we're hearing a lot about the gain. This is going to be great for us. It's going to make things so much better. It's going to make things easier. We've all heard those before. But what we don't acknowledge when we're trying to really pump up that gain, that yes, this thing is going to be amazing, is that we don't acknowledge that often what people are feeling is a sense of loss when they are experiencing change. So one of the biggest contradictions between the two. But this was just a really helpful chart that I found that kind of gave a quick point by point breakdown of change versus transition. So continuing on, again, chat question if we want to, something to reflect on later. Thinking about us as leaders in our workplace. And when I say leaders, it doesn't always have to be that supervisor, that manager, the director, that person whose job title involves actually leading and managing teams. Leaders in our workplaces can be those change champions. They can be those people who are representatives of our departments or our specific agencies or buildings or whatever that is. So leader in this context doesn't necessarily have to be someone whose title means leader. So we can think of ourselves as leaders as well. All right. So just a quick reminder or new information for anyone who's joining us today. When we experience transition, we experience our internal change. We feel that across 4 different areas, starting with our mind, thoughts race. We become forgetful, confused. We might be in disbelief, less confidence. Some of us might absolutely have those thoughts where it's like, nope, this is not happening. But it can affect us, and if you don't see something in here that sounds like you, just remember it's individual and anytime we share information about what people might be feeling, it is talking in generals. So if you don't experience things like racing thoughts, that's fine. Emotionally, we are all over the place. We want to deny it. We want to be angry. We want to be, anxious. We're vulnerable. We're agitated. If it's a good change, yes, we're going to feel excitement. We're still going to feel, that feel that whatever it is when you're really looking forward to something, maybe a higher level of excitement, but you still might also feel things like I feel vulnerable, because even a good change, especially if it's something like a new job, a new home, a new change in a relationship, something changed, there's still a bit of loss associated with that. So even if you're feeling all of the great feelings, you might also feel some of the ones that make us feel not our best. So that sadness and that fear, shock is a big one. Behaviorally, again, we're accident prone because we can't keep our thoughts straight, so we're kind of all over the place there. We make mistakes. We see gossip start increasing in our workplaces. It might cause issues with performance and relationships. And again, like I discussed earlier in the week, we can also see that sometimes people begin engaging in behaviors that aren't the best for them. Those little things that we do, those coping mechanisms that give us that little boost of happiness when we're kind of feeling down, we may start relying on those more and more, which can lead to unhealthy behaviors. And then, of course, physically, when our mind and emotions are all kind of in chaos, we tend to feel that physically through illness. So it's stomach aches, it's headaches, it's grinding our teeth and tense muscles. We might oversleep or undersleep. So, change can kind of leave us feeling like we're just in a big, big state of mess. So that's what we're trying to really focus on, is the things that we can do to manage and regulate these four areas so that we're better able to go through our change. And thinking about significant change in the workplace, just something to reflect on. How did we respond emotionally, mentally, or behaviorally? Was it hard to think about things? Was it hard to stay on task? What strategies and support might have helped you navigate that change? And self-reflection like this can be really helpful in learning to identify when things are starting to feel too much for us. We start to become more aware of how we react. The feelings become familiar. So when we start feeling them, we're more likely to recognize and act in intervention rather than reaching a point where we need that prevention rather than the point where we need kind of interventive strategies. There's also one other thing that can affect us as we are navigating change, especially if we are that leader in the workplace, and it's the marathon effect. If you are someone who enjoys running, maybe you run marathons, you're probably kind of familiar with the marathon effect. For those of us like me who would rather not run marathons, the marathon effect is, if you think of a marathon, especially a big one where we're talking, multiple thousands of people are participating, the New York City Marathon, the Boston Marathon. I know there was a big one out in California not too long ago. But when we're at these things, we've got multiple thousands of people who are racing. They don't just release them all at once, because that would be chaos. We'd have people all over the place. We'd have people kind of, stampeding others. So what they tend to do is release them in waves. So the first wave goes, and then second and third and so on. And if we take that strategy and apply it to our workplaces, it kind of helps us understand why we start feeling those negative feelings, why, we can't have a handle on our behavior and our mindset. Because what happens is the people in the first wave, you've got all the information. You've likely had time to get used to it because your race started long before wave two, right? So you're running along, and then suddenly wave two goes out, and wave three, wave four, and all of these people are suddenly starting to catch up with you. But the difference is they haven't had the same amount of time to, work through their process, their internal transition for this change. So as they're catching up to you in the first wave, they're asking those questions, what's going on? Where's this information? How do we do this? How do we handle this? What if this goes wrong? So you start getting all of those questions, but it's not just from the second wave people. It's from the third wave people, the fourth wave people. And then sometimes we even have people who just kind of stumble into the marathon with us, who weren't even part of a wave. And so as the first wave runner, you're pretty tired, right? You've had all these questions, you've answered them all before, you've shown everyone where the information is. So the more people who start catching up, who are asking these same things and looking for the same support and help, you reach a point where you're just like, I can't do this anymore. So it starts becoming, well, if you didn't see the email, go back to your inbox and check for it. Or, oh, that was talked about in a meeting 2 weeks ago. There's some notes somewhere. So taking it to a deeper level, though, understanding that you're the first wave, you've had the information, you've had the time to adjust, and that it is perfectly natural to feel the weight of that when everyone is looking to you for guidance and support. It's just helpful to remember that even though you're used to it by now, the person coming up to you and asking isn't. So you may have answered that same question 15 times today, but for that person who's asking it now, usually this is the first time they're hearing about it. So it allows us to have a little bit of a perspective change where it's like they're not doing this just because, they aren't capable of finding the information or they don't want to find the information. They're asking you because they understand that you've already run that part of the race and all they need is some support. So I really like that perspective because I think it can really help us, you know, that little impatient flare something thinks, no, they're not quite in the first wave yet. So we're gonna still help them out. But this also allows us the opportunity, knowing that we're in that first wave, on ways that we can help kind of get through that so that maybe we don't have to take on all of the responsibility of being the support and the go-to person. It's also helpful to know, and you'll remember this from earlier this week, is the transition model that William Bridges coined. So trapeze act here because that is what he likened the model to, is that it's a trapeze act. We're being asked to stand on a platform. We're being asked to grab onto a swinging bar. We're being asked to fly over nothingness and land on the other side, hopefully fully intact and prepared to move forward and keep going. But it's kind of a scary transition, right? We're beginning at an end because we're asking people to let go of things. We're saying, can you, go with us on this journey? Can you be part of the people who move to this new building or this new policy change? We need you to come along with us. And so they're asking a lot of all of us, right? They're asking us to accept and let go and swing out into a neutral zone where it's ambiguous and where it's kind of scary because we've started letting go of the things that we used to know, but we're still not quite that new shiny thing that we've been promised. So we're in this ambiguous kind of swinging neutral zone. This is where people really start to feel those emotions and those behaviors, those thoughts and those physical symptoms. And this is also the point where people might choose to not continue on. They're going to let go of their trapeze bar. They're going to hit the safety net and walk away because it's too much. Some of us are going to get stuck there, and you're going to have to grab one of those. I think they're called shepherd's hooks that you usually see in like vaudeville acts where they hook it around someone's waist and pull them over. We might have to hook that person by the waist and pull them over to the platform. So we really want to make sure that when we're looking at ways to help lead through change, we're looking at the support we can provide during the neutral zone. And then, of course, what we're hoping for is that we're going to hit that other platform and that we're going to celebrate our wins. We're going to acknowledge our losses. We're going to acknowledge our challenges. And hopefully, we're all going to be able to move on and continue doing what we need to do. And although it looks like a linear process, it isn't. We're all over the place. You can hit that new beginning platform and go, nope, not liking this, and jump back into the neutral zone. You may never decide to get off of the platform and let go. So everybody kind of swings back and forth. We go at our own rate, but it really does help to um, give a visualization of what we're experiencing, that letting go, that accepting ambiguity, and then hopefully hitting the other side. Again, because typically we run this presentation runs about an hour and a half, but we're doing an hour today. So something to think, share in the chat or QA if you'd like to. In thinking about changes that you've experienced, and we're looking at the bridges transition model of beginning at the end, swinging out into ambiguity, and then ending at the beginning, what phase might be most challenging for you to navigate, and why might that be? Again, self-reflection is really great in helping us start to um, unpack and uncover the reasons why we may respond to change the way that we do. So switching forward to now we know that, this is why we react to change. This is why, we feel the way we do. This is why people might leave us. This is why, as a leader, I'm so exhausted when it comes to change. It's now time to kind of switch tack and look at ways that we can help others. And what's great about these strategies is that they can also be used, individually. So if you're the leader, these can be great for you in helping you get your feet underneath you, and getting ready to help the people that are coming up behind you. So of course, we all know clear communication. We got to communicate. We know empathy is important. We know that we have to have stakeholder involvement, and by stakeholder in terms of this presentation, we are talking about the people who are being asked to experience and go through and work through the change. There's things about being the importance of being present as a leader, how we recognize and celebrate our wins. Resilience is a huge strategy that we can employ, and then of course offering support. And the first thing that we start with, as leaders, is we have to understand who we are as leaders in our workplaces. The reasons we do this is that it allows us to develop a deeper level of self-awareness. It allows us to learn how we lead people. Am I authoritative? Do I have a servant leadership attitude? Am I more of the radical candor type of leader? It's just a way for us to identify what our strengths are in our teams and what our limitations might be so that we know how to address them and work through them. And we do this by self-analyzation. So things like there's mindfulness tools that you can try out. There's personality assessments and things like that, that of course, they're not based in any hard science. They're very much a soft science kind of thing that can change depending on your feelings that day. But they can usually help give us some insight into who we are, at least on some level. And we're doing that because, again, we're learning for ourselves how we respond to change, because it brings that self awareness where we're better at making decisions, where we are leading authentically. So we're not trying to be the leader we think our team needs, we're being the leader that we know our team needs. It also, when we have a level of self awareness, we know who we are and how we lead, we are better at building our teams, we're better at being adaptable, and it increases our own resilience, because we know who we are. So we know that there's a point where I start feeling this way and I know I need a break. The self aware leader is able to then take that break and come back to their team ready and continuing on with whatever it is that we are experiencing. So, really starting off with getting to know who we are as a leader can be very impactful and very helpful in how we implement other strategies to help people in the workplace. Um, Again, just a question to think about. You'll receive the PowerPoint PDF later on, so you'll have these to think about. But knowing who you are as a leader, how does your style influence your reaction to change, how you manage change? What are your strengths? Most of us can at least think of one or two strengths right off the top of our heads. And then what areas could we improve upon? We also can probably at least think of one thing right away where we're like, I could be better at communicating, or I could be better at knowing how to offer support. So that, again, that deeper level work of identifying who we are and how we manage and the strengths and limitations that we bring to our teams. As I had mentioned, leadership presence is really important in navigating change, for the reasons listed there on the screen. We build trust, it enhances our communication, are able to show support, we are, demonstrating commitment to our teams, we're better at collaborating. But what this means is it's that level of presence where you're not just present in the building, but you're actually there for people. And to help kind of set the stage, in a prior job, we were going through a very, very big change. It was affecting the entire organization, but it was affecting our building the most, of course. And our leadership wasn't handling it as well as they could have been. There was, miscommunication, there was no communication. And for our building leader, our building manager, they were there in the building, but they were not present with us. They, spent a ton of time in their office with the door closed. If anyone came to them with a question, it was always, oh gosh, I don't know about this. Let me check with our admin. So they were there, but they were not present. They didn't know what was going on. They didn't step out of their office to help with anything. We had a couple of incidents that were a little traumatic during that time, and they would open their office door, poke their head out, and see that other people had it handled, and were like, well, if you need me, I'll be in here. So the difference between being present and being present is really, really important. So being present in our leadership means that, we're communicating as often as we need to, that we are, leaving our office when we can, but that we're setting those boundaries of, well, if my office door is open, please feel free to come in. If it's closed, I'm in a meeting. Just know that I'll be out in a little bit. So making sure that we are actually present in our buildings so that our teams see who we are, they see how we're managing the change, and they are acknowledging that we are leading by example. So again, really important to make sure that if we are leaders in the workplace, that we actually have presence. We can also do a couple of things through actionable strategies that help build momentum through leadership. Because often what happens is we get to that ambiguous neutral zone and momentum kind of flags. We've talked about it. We're not quite there yet. Maybe we're kind of sick of it. So we have to keep that momentum going. And there's a couple of ways that we can do this. Celebrating small wins is important. How you choose to do them with your teams is going to depend upon your team and the work environment. But it's things like taking a moment to thank everyone for their contributions, making sure to thank people, hey, we experienced a challenge, we did our best, I appreciate that. It also is done to help inspire confidence and keep that momentum going of we're focusing on some wins, we're still acknowledging those losses, but here's some wins that we can look at. It's also about leading with empathy. It can be so hard to be empathetic in our workplaces when we're tired, when we're overwhelmed, when we're expected to work through a change and lead people while still maybe having bosses above us. So it becomes really almost easy to just kind of brush it off and be like, you know what? Again, not doing this. But we have to be able to have that empathy in our workplace. Being able to acknowledge our emotional responses to change is a fantastic way to do that. So for example, we hear the term a lot, model the behavior you want to see. So if we're in our workplaces and as the leader, we model vulnerability to say, I'm not okay today and I need a few minutes. It sets an example for the team and the people around us. And it also does allow us to validate concerns and provide the reassurance that people need that we are all going through this together. And then, of course, a really big one. Um, I know I've spoken, I believe, to probably a few of you at least hear about psychological safety before. Um, but when we can create that psychologically safe workspace for our teams, what we find is that people are more likely to speak up when they need to. They're more likely to ask questions because they know that they're not working in an environment where they're going to be judged or punished in any way for, speaking up, for asking the question, for posing a challenge. Because we're without fear, we're without judgment there. So in creating that sense of psychological safety in our workplaces is incredibly important, especially as we start heading toward that ambiguous neutral zone. And the ways we can do this, there's a lot of resources out there on how to build psychological safety, but ultimately what it comes down to is, again, creating that team environment where we respect what people have to say. We don't have to be nice all the time. We just have to be supportive. And I could always send out resources on how that can be done. So building momentum through leadership is a strategy that we can employ to help our teams. Communication. Everything in life comes back to communication, right? We can't escape it. And often what we find is that when we are going through a change, especially if we're looking at it from an organizational level, um, typically what happens is, we forward the email, we take a quick announcement during a meeting, and we assume that everybody received the message. But ensuring that the communication is actually having the impact it's supposed to, there's a few things we need to remember to do. Being transparent. It's okay to share the why behind the change. It's okay to share why things may not be working as well as they should be. It's also okay to share the why of, hey, this is going great. Because what this does is it gives us the opportunity to provide more regular updates. And again, it just builds that trust because, hey, they're being truthful with us. Making sure that we're adapting our communication styles because we all receive and process information differently. So it's not enough to just forward an email or make an announcement. It's making sure that we're providing access to the channels that people need for communication. So Teams messaging, of course, in one-on-one conversations, whatever that might be. And then active listening. I know that for many of us, when we are going through change and we're anxious and we're stressed out and we're just, we're not fully present, actively listening can be really hard because again, you've probably heard the question 600 times that day. And so someone starts to ask in our initial response is, we might cut them off or say, oh, go check the email, do whatever. But by taking that moment to breathe and actively listen to what they're saying, giving them the head shake, the encouragement to keep talking without interrupting, again, it shows that we have understanding and it also allows us to provide a way to make plans for actual follow-up. So hearing that person's question of, well, I know you said it was in the email, but I'm still not seeing where it is in this email. Can you help me with it? Odds are if that one person is asking this, there's 5 or 6 other people who have the same concern who haven't. So it allows us to look at it from a different perspective and create that follow-up that we might need to help everybody out. We also need to make sure that we're focusing on cultivating the strength of our teams during change because, we all know it can fall apart really quickly. So we keep continuing to cultivate that trust through our consistency in words and actions, following through on our commitments, modeling vulnerability, being present in our workplaces, just being as available as we can be. We can also, again, continue to encourage that collaboration. We can host things like workshops or brainstorming sessions, which can be really, really helpful um, in what we're doing. We can also help promote cross functional teamwork. So if we know that we're getting a new computer system. We've got some concerns about it. Maybe we have someone on our team who's a bit resistant because they don't know that they have the skills necessary. Is there another department, agency, organization that we work with that already has this implemented? And can we have, our team occasionally work with them to build up those skills? And then creating change champions. And I know it's number 2 on the list, but I save it for last because this is one of the most powerful things that we can do as leaders to help us navigate change personally, as well as promoting that trust and collaboration in the team. And that's by identifying the change champions in our workplaces. These are those people who seem to have influence with the team. They might be the person who um, will often speak up during a team meeting. They might be the person who others go to when they need support. By identifying those people in our workplaces and bringing them on board with us through, of course, asking their permission, letting them know that, hey, I've noticed that people come to you during times of, whatever it is. Would you be willing that if someone had a question and I'm not here to answer it, they could come to you? Um, then you just equip them with those tools and they can kind of help also motivate their peers. So identifying change champions can be really, really helpful so that, again, when you're the first wave and your race is done and someone's coming up from behind who just somehow found their way into our race, it's great to be able to have that change champion that can be like, oh, I can step in and help with this. So making sure that we're identifying change champions can be really helpful. Supporting us at an individual level requires the same things as building our teams, but it also requires being able to recognize that because we are individuals and our changes are all different, we're all feeling different things, we're reacting in different ways, that we have to be able to provide flexible solutions based on personal circumstance. And all that means is understanding that not everything is going to work for the entire group and that we can be flexible where we can be. So if someone needs 10 extra minutes to absorb some information or work through a problem, are we able to give them that? If someone is having one of those days where it's like, this all feels too much, it's too overwhelming, are we in a place where we can give them 5 minutes to go decompress if they need to, finding those solutions that work within our environments that don't require special accommodation or anything like that. So we can usually find something flexible to help that person that's struggling. We can also do this by, again, offering one-on-one coaching if we have to, mentoring peer resource groups, peer support groups, EAP groups, whatever it might be, making sure that they know where to go for additional support. It's also vitally important that if we have someone on a team like me who is really resistant to something, it helps if we take the time to understand why. Again, I mentioned it a slide ago, new software system, someone might be completely resistant to it because their concern is that they are not someone who has the skills necessary to work that program. It doesn't, it's so much easier to find that out and find a solution to that than trying to, well, it's your job, you have to kind of do it. So let's understand why people might be resistant and then allow our empathy to guide those conversations and help them find the resources they need, which leads to option 3 there. Making sure that we're just sharing out resources. So again, things like EAP resources. I know UW Wellness has some other great resources. What mentoring groups, what peer support, whatever it might be, knowing that those are available and how to offer them to people. And that doesn't mean that, you have to keep a list for everybody to look through. You could put one up in a break room and say, these are the supports that are available to you, or reminding people of, hey, there's I don't know, I'm trying to think of a reason. There's a peer support group. They're having a listening session on helping people through change. Remember, it's going on Tuesday. So we offer those resources as often as we can because, again, it gives people another outlet to reach out to for help. For help so that they are not always relying on you. So in keeping with the flow of everything, taking a moment to reflect on, what's a strategy that we can implement to help build resilience with yourself or in your team? How can you incorporate this into your leadership practice? So is it finding that change champion? Is it just making sure that you know where resources and supports are so that if someone asks for them, you can just point them in that right direction? Is it, being that person who is really great at active listening? What can we implement to help strengthen our own resilience to help our teams find what they need? Not done talking yet. Another thing that we have that I recently learned about is a leadership playbook. I have an example. I'll make sure I send it to Jessica so that she can share it when all of this is ready for you. What a leadership playbook is it's an opportunity for us to sit down, create a checklist, a written document, whatever you might need, where you can anticipate what people might experience when they're navigating those transitions. So you can ask yourself, what might my team ask? And provide yourself the opportunity to actually have that answer before someone comes to you. It can be something like creating a checklist to make sure that this is our communication plan and this is how we're going to make sure information gets out. The playbook is really great because it can be personalized to your specific needs. And again, even if you're not a supervisor, manager, whatever, the playbook can also help you as the person going through change because it gives you, again, that opportunity to sit down and reflect. What questions do I have? What support might I need? You know, all of those things that you might have, it gives you an opportunity to put them all together so that we can have these conversations. And again, I have an example that I'll share out with that. Another actionable tool that is really helpful for leadership is feedback loops, surveys or feedback forms, just so we can gauge where morale is. And it allows us to gather feedback and hopefully implement or refine strategies in real time. It also kind of gives us an idea as to where people might be struggling. And then again, self-assessments are always helpful. So reflecting on our change management approach. So the Mind Tools leadership quiz, when I put this together, that was a free resource that could be used online just to assess where we're going. And then speaking of assessments, I always point out that there are things like stress inventories available, anxiety inventories that you can do just to kind of give yourself kind of a gauge where you are feeling, emotionally, what your stress levels and such might be like so that you can start implementing plans if you need to. So making sure we're self-assessing as often as possible. And it's really important to remember that, again, we don't go through change alone. We go through this together. We might experience different things, we might feel different ways, but we are going through the change together. And when we're better able to identify points of stress for ourselves and find the ways and the strategies to mitigate them, that we find that we are better able to weather the changes that we are going through. So, again, contact information for the EAP. And I did make sure to bring resources should anyone like to continue learning about this, because we can talk in an hour, but there's so much more learning that can be done. The Managing Transitions is William Bridges' book that goes really deeply into his model. Um, some really great suggestions right there. I did share out some leadership assessment tools. Again, these were all free the last time that I checked them. Again, you don't have to take them as fact for everything. They're just meant to help guide us through and kind of pinpoint areas in our lives where we have our strengths or where we have some challenges that we might need to overcome. But don't, say this is what this result is. This is me 100%, because we're all flexible, ever evolving people. And then more resources for learning. Whenever possible, I try to provide information for free continuing learning. So classes that you can take that teach more about this, and then of course TED Talks, because there's always some good information to be found in there. As I do bring this presentation to an end, the additional resources that I have here include things like communication strategies we can implement, team strategies we can implement, following the guideline of William Bridges' transition model. So, for example, on this one about communication, you can see that it starts off with our beginning at the end, our neutral zone, and then getting to our beginning. It explains why these things are important and how we can do specific things within those periods of transition to help each other through it. So, practice active listening by giving your full attention. So I had that one. We've got team building, using the transition model to help us understand change and what we might be going through. It was a lot of really great information that could absolutely take up another 3 or 4 hours for a presentation, but I felt it was best if they were shared this way as something that people can reflect on and use later on should they need to. But we are at a point where I can stop and we can have time for questions, concerns. If there's other information that you'd like shared, if you're not familiar with EAP, I'm also happy to answer questions about that, but I will pause for a second. I don't know if Jessica wants to stop the recording now for Q&A time, but I'm going to pause for just a second.